Ang mga binibenta ko pong pagkain na ulam, adobo, sinigang, kaldereta, pork chop, fried chicken, may mga gulay, pakbet, tsaka chapsoy. Karamihan na kumakain sa akin, nagtatrabaho sa Mapua, mga empleyado. Tapos, estudyante rin ng Mapua, SEUM, Manila High. Ayun po, nakakatulong ang tindahan po namin sa Intramuros, lalo na po ang Sanamay. Malaking bagay po sa mga estudyante at mga empleyado sa Intramuros na nagtatrabaho. Kasi pangmasa po ang presyo. 40 years na po ako nakatira sa Intramuros, naranasan na namin yung hirap, baha. Para sa amin, ang Intramuros, malaking bagay kasi dito nabuhay yung mga anak ko, dito ako nagpalaki ng mga anak ko, dito ko kinuha yung pampalaki ng mga anak ko, maaral. Kaya ang Intramuros, malaking bagay sa amin. Dito na rin nag-aaral ng mga anak ko ng high school, elementary sa Quiapo, Mabini, nag-high school sa Manila High School, sa Intramuros. Ako po si Edna Apable. Merong isang karinderya sa Intramuros. Ang ginagawa ko po, namamalengke sa madaling araw, nagluluto, nagtitinda. Ang pangarap ko po sa Intramuros, sana huwag kaming mawala at habang buhay kami makapaghanap buhay sa Intramuros.
So naging special sa akin yung Intramuros dahil dito rin ako nakatira, so dito na rin ako kumukuha para sa hanap buhay namin. And then ang Intramuros din para sa akin is parang isang tahanan na rin para sa akin. So ang role ko dito sa Intramuros ay parang tayo nag-a-attract or nagpapa-attract sa mga turista dito sa loob ng Intramuros para kahit pa paano makita rin nila yung kagandahan ng Intramuros. Ako nga pala si Valentino Mejia, isang e-trike driver dito sa Intramuros. So ang nakikita ko sa future ng Intramuros is lalawak pa yung ating turismo dito sa loob ng Intramuros, and then talagang makikilala ang Intramuros sa buong Pilipinas, hindi lang sa buong Pilipinas, sa buong mundo.
Ang Intramuros, isa sa pinakamahalagang lugar dito sa buong Pilipinas. Ito ay isa sa pinaka-historical place. Ay naitutulong ng isang kutsero ay may turo sa mga bawat namamasyal kung anong mahalagang lugar dito sa Intramuros. Mga rule ng mga kutsero ay kailangan panatili, malinis ang lugar, tapos mag-uniforme, sundin ang mga tuntunin ng Intramuros. Dito sa Intramuros, sana isang araw o bawat isang linggo, bigyan nila ng mga libre na mga lugar para lalong pasyalan ng mga mamamasyal dito sa Intramuros. Yung iba kasi namamasyal dito, hindi nakakapasok sa mga lugar-lugar kasi may mga bayan. po pala si Romeo M. Javier bilang isang kutsero at bilang isang tour guide sa Intramuros. Dito rin ako nabubuhay at nabubuhay ang aking pamilya. Kaya malaking tulong ang Intramuros sa buhay ng bawat isang kutsero dito.
Dahil po sa isang hanap buhay na marangal na nagpipidikap. Dati po akong waiter ng Tamais Catering. Ngayon, nagpipidikap na po ako dahil marami pong turista dito sa loob ng Intramuros. Nandito po ako sa Intramuros, 1994. Bukod po sa pagpipidikap, tinitrain po kami ng DOT sa pag-guide ng tour and guide sa Intramuros. Sa darating na panahon, marami pa pong mga improvement ang Intramuros dahil sa IA, sa maintenance, sa kalinisan, kaayusan. Good morning po, ako po si Gerald Abellar. Ang trabaho po dito ay nagpipidikab. Ang gusto pang mangyari dito sa loob ng Intramuros ay ma-improve yung kagandahan, maraming matulungan na barangay.
I've been a resident of Intramuros for half of my life, and my children has grown to love this place. We are trying to promote Intramuros through our venue because we feel that this is one way of inviting tourists to come and experience Intramuros. This place is actually the ancestral house of my husband. So this is where he grew up. So he's been here for like his entire lifetime. So it really means a lot, not only to him and his family, but to us also. We would like Intramuros to be a premier tourist destination. My name is Cosette Chua. I am the Managing Director of Pavilion de la Castellana. We are working closely with the administrator to further improve what we have. I believe that this is the only historical place that's left in Manila. In my own little way, I would like to think that I can contribute to its historical value.
Very unique, one of its kind. It's a historical zone actually. No? You have lots of museums in and out of the walls. No? Jaime Jimmy Lim. I've started doing business here in 1988. I opened a small retail shop catering to Mapua students just in front of OWA, Overseas Worker Welfare Administration. And my main customer is Mapua. So now we thought of putting up this training center institute right in the heart of Intramuros. No? What better place, because it is a university hub. As you can see, we have 5 universities here and 1 middle school. We need more of this current administrator to see a better Intramuros. I'm very happy right now with the current administrator. Then what I hope for is a cleaner Intramuros. I hope all the stakeholders inside Intramuros will come together. We cannot all be leaders. Let's just follow the leader who is giving us the right direction.
Sa akin, special yung Intramuros dahil sa punong-puno ng historical yung Intramuros. Napamahal na rin po ako dito sa Intramuros dahil dito po ako nagtatrabaho. Ako po si Christian Roa. Ako po isang security guard ng Intramuros bilang isang katipunero po. Naitutulong ko po dito sa Intramuros na mapanatili po yung kalinisan, kaayusan, at matiwasay na pagpapatupad. Ni-expect ko po dito sa Intramuros dahil po sa lalong tumatagal, gumaganda siya at dumarami yung mga turista na bumibisita dito.
AMOSUP, Associated Marine Officers Seamen's Union of the Philippines. Ang AMSUP ay isang union ng mga seaman, exclusive lang sa kanila. Ang AMSUP members po namin ay nagagaling na iba't ibang lugar sa Pilipinas. Dito na lahat nagsama-sama. Puro mga seaman lahat mga yan. Dito sa ginagawa ko rito ay na-assist ko po yung mga members namin, mga union members, kasi exclusive lang sa kanila para dito sa dormitory. Ang contribution ko sa Intramuros ay siguro pangalagahan itong lugar na ito. Ang Intramuros importante sa akin dahil dito ako nagtatrabaho at wala na po ibang mapuntahan na dahil sa edad natin, kaya importante sa akin ang Intramuros. Ako si Joel Carino, nagtatrabaho rito sa AMSUP. Ako ay bilang supervisor dito sa dormitory. Ako ay 16 years rito sa AMSUP sa Ilorzon. Ang may contribute ko rito sa Intramuros bilang isang empleyado, supervisor sa AMSUP, kailangan mapangalagaan yung mga member para sa kanilang contribution sa ating bansa.
As an Augustinian, it's special for me because in the history, after the Augustinian set foot in Cebu, so they came here in Intramuros and they established the convent and the house here in Intramuros. So it's special for me as an NCC official because this is an example, a model for other places here in the Philippines on how we will be able to preserve the heritage that was passed on to us from the past. They always have a saying that hindi ka makakarating sa pupuntahan mo kung hindi ka babalikan yung nakaraan. Well, past is very important to us because from the past we learn many things, including the pitfalls, a lot of challenges. So that's why it's important for us to know the past so that we will know where we're going to and we can reach our goal with confidence in the future. I wish that Intramuros will be a place where people will be educated on the heritage of the past And also, well, I wish Intramuros would be a clean, to be clean or cleaner, and not much obstruction in terms of the appreciation for tourists, for tourism purposes. And, it could be better, like just many other heritage structures that we have abroad. Well taken care of and maintained, and it serves really its purpose. I am Father Harold Renteria, OSA. I'm the head of the Subcommission for Cultural Heritage of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. NCCA is the ex facto Minister of Culture of the country now, and its mandate is to come up with policies for the preservation, protection, and conservation of the cultural heritage of the country, and to manage the NEFCA, which is a grant-giving agency also. Well, as somebody in NCCA, especially as the head of the Subcommission for Cultural Heritage, my role is to make sure that we safeguard not only the structures, but the intangible heritage here in Intramuros, the history, the memories of the people here. And of course, since Intramuros serves as the buffer zone for the San Agustin Church, it's a World Heritage Site. And NCCA is the manager of the World Heritage Site. So our role is to make sure that San Agustin Church and the other churches which were inscribed also, part of the inscription, are safeguarded, are protected.
I want to describe Intramuros as a juxtaposition. I like the fact that it is steeped in history, but I want it also through our project, it's going to be steeped into our future, our vision for the future for the Philippines. Growing up, we went to Intramuros. I remember watching a PETA play in Intramuros, and it was really quite memorable because with the backdrop of the Intramuros, the walls of Intramuros, it was really such a natural environment. So it was kind of like a complete experience of the play. Hi, I'm Ria Matute. I'm the Executive Director of Design Center of the Philippines. Design Center is a technical agency of the Department of Trade and Industry. We provide design services to Philippine micro, small, medium enterprises to improve its competitiveness in the local and the global market. I guess Design Center actually started partnering with the Intramuros administration primarily from the connection with Design Week Philippines, when Design Week Philippines identified the Intramuros area as a creative environment. From the very beginning, we saw the potential of Intramuros, not just from the historical point of view of the place and the significance, the historical significance of the place, but as well as how it can shape the future of the Philippines and how it can also become an iconic experience, not just of the past, but of the future of the Philippines as a country, as the Filipinos as a
When I started out with the Department of Tourism, we wanted the theme, or to be the overarching theme, to be a culture of sustainable tourism. And what's good with Intramuros administration is that we should preserve it because it's a historical and a cultural site. And Intramuros is what we can call one of our national treasures. And I want the Intramuros, the district of Intramuros, it's not where you go for field trips or weddings or photo shoots. It should be a place where everybody would like to go to enjoy the sights, and it's like a place where it's like going back in time. Intramuros is a place, I think, that a living urban heritage district. It's where you have history and culture come to life. I'm Bernadette Romulo Puyat. I'm the Secretary of Tourism and also the Chairperson of the Intramuros administration. Intramuros should promote the cultures and values of Malasakit and Malikain.
If there's something about Manila that hasn't changed ever since, it's the lovely sunrise and sunset, as if reminding us that in all the chaos, there's still beauty to find in this place we all call home. And moving around it every day, doing the things that we have to do, we completely forget the invaluable history that it holds and the endless possibilities it can achieve. As Intramuros administration celebrates its 40th year, we also celebrate its people. As we work together, inspire each other, and teach one another of the many ways why this city is a place we will always love to call home. Standing as one so that we never forget the past that taught us how to survive, so we can move forward with a strong heart to build a future that we can all be proud of. We are Intramuros.
Uh, what what you just heard was a performance of the Kulintang by Mr. Vin Tamayo at the Fort Santiago. We hope that this video will help set the tone for our topic for today. Uh, Hello, my name is Raj Suleiman, and this is the 19th episode of the Intramuros Learning Sessions. Our topic for today is about the history of Islam in pre-Hispanic Manila. This topic is very important, despite Manila's outstanding Islamic pre-colonial heritage, the topic is rarely talked about. As such, we at the Intramuros administration hope to contribute in enriching this discourse on this often overlooked discourse. But before we start, I would like to share some house rules first. Uh, huh. So if you are viewing via Facebook, so if you would like to ask questions, you may send it through the Q&A button if you're viewing via Zoom. So the Q&A button is found in the lower portion of the screen. But if you're viewing via Facebook, you can send your questions in the comment section. Please note that we will do our best to accommodate all of the questions, subject to the availability of our speakers should we exceed the time limit. Only those who have successfully registered and viewed on Zoom will be eligible to get a certificate. A feedback form will be emailed to you after the session, and the certificate will be sent within the week. If you are unable to attend the webinar, please let us know now so we can give the slot to another registrant. Ensure that the audio is okay. Wear your reliable set of headphones and don't be shy. We encourage questions later. And most importantly, get yourself comfortable and enjoy. I'd now like to call on the Administrator of Intramuros, Attorney Guilherme Arcido, to introduce for us today our distinguished speaker. Attorney?
Magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat. Good afternoon to all. This is the 19th episode of the Intramuros Learning Session. For the past 18 episodes, we have so far covered significant discussions regarding culture, heritage, and history. Pero meron pong isang chapter tayo na nakakalimutan, and that we would like to have a good discussion and conversation with this afternoon. Our guest this afternoon is Professor Darwin Absari. Professor Darwin is a professor at the University of the Philippines Institute of Islamic Studies. He holds a BA Political Science from the Mindanao State University and an MA in Islamic Studies from the UP Diliman Institute of Islamic Studies. He is a well-published author. He has written several books, and he is usually invited as well in a number of conferences and programs with respect to our Islamic heritage. So for this afternoon po, we would like to introduce to you, and we hope to have a good conversation with Professor Darwin Absari.
Thank you, Administrator. Now I'd like to call on Professor Absari for the presentation. Professor?
Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat at sa ating mga bisita. Nang una, nais kong magpasalamat at magpahiwatig ng aking pag-congratulate sa Intramuros Administration sa pag-reach out sa amin at upang bigyang halaga ang kasaysayan ng Muslim sa Maynila noong panahon nang wala pa yung Kastila sapagkat ito ay napaka-importante.
Sir, if I may, yung audio po natin is mahina.
Isi-share ko yung aking file. Okay, my topic is on Islam and the Muslims in Pre-Hispanic Manila. I thought about coming out with this outline, although the topic is mainly on the Muslims in Manila, but I thought about um, extending the discussion towards the contemporary time to give relevance to the topic because, like I said, the history of Muslims in Manila remains to be relevant in the rediscovering the Filipino identity and in regaining the country's lost heritage. So I plan to talk about, as a background, the pre-Islamic Manila, and then Islam, a little background about Islam as a religion, who are the Muslims, and then how it came to Manila, and then I will proceed with the Spanish evangelization and the so-called bipartite historical narrative. Then the propaganda and the tripartite historical production. This took place during the revolution of the Filipino people at the last part of the Spanish period. And then I will briefly talk about the American westernization that produces another historical narratives. And then the what I call the second reawakening or the indigenization of knowledge and the vision of a new society by President Marcos. And then I'm going to talk about the legacy of Islam in the country, which is best seen in the history of the Muslims in Manila. And then I'm going to finally talk about what is the status of Philippine Muslim history in the present. So let me begin by the background before Islam came to Manila. As you know, for the longest time, we have been um, brought into a consciousness that before the coming of the Spaniards, there was no civilization, and that civilization began with their arrival. But this kind of narrative, insofar as the contemporary situation is concerned, is already obsolete, especially in the academic institutions where there are lots of new studies coming out that talk about the civilization of the country long before the coming of the Spaniards. And there are some evidences to that kind of narrative. For example, the 900 AD Laguna Copper Plate inscription that was unearthed in 1989 mentions of five Hindu principalities in the country. I think three in Bulacan, one in Tondo. Um, that reveals some kind of a degree of civilization of the early Filipino people at that time. The Indians, they came to Southeast Asia as early as the first century AD, and they brought with them their civilization, and they imparted their religion so that the local people in Southeast Asia, including here in the Philippines, inherited through economic interaction the civilizations of the Indians. Um, One of those influences, for example, as revealed in the studies of Juan Francisco, for example, that the influences of the Indians can be seen in our folklore and literature, and even in our languages to some extent. We have 150 words borrowed from Sanskrit, of which 64% are in the Tagalog. For example, mukha, likha, lasa, budhi. And study shows that our system of writings has also been influenced primarily by the Indians. Our system of government, the Rajaship and the Dattaship, and even to some extent the religion and spirituality of Hindu Buddhists also found their way to influenced the early Filipinos' sense of spirituality and religion. There are many examples. I put here one example is the word dukkha. Dukkha in Tagalog is extremely poor, but dukkha in Hindu, especially in Buddhist teachings, is one and the first of the four noble truths of basic Buddhist teachings. It's there's a story behind this. Siddhartha, or popularly known as Buddha, he was a prince, and he was some sort of way imprisoned by his father within the palace because a um, there was a for sort of a revelation that the one who will destroy the palace will be from within the palace, and that it was believed that it was the little prince Siddhartha. So um, his father saw to it that he will never see the negative aspect, the negative side of life. So he was imprisoned within the palace. But there was a point in his time when he escaped. It was triggered by some of the realizations that he has. He escaped from the palace in search for enlightenment. And the first realization that he had was he saw that the world is full of sorrow. It is full of sufferings, full of problems. It is, in an abstract sense, an emptiness. So that became the first noble truth in the Buddhist teachings, known as the dukkha. And having that Tagalog word dukkha, we can assume that Buddhist teachings also found their way to influence the early Filipino sense of spirituality. So Manila, and along with other trading ports, important trading ports like Cebu, Mindoro, Butuan, and Sulu, were subjected to what I call a civilizational nurturing by various civilizations that came to trade. And the first one was the Hindu-Buddhist civilization. And then it was followed by our long interaction with China. In 1225, the word Malilu, which is believed by many scholars to be Manila, appeared in Chinese accounts. And then in 1373, Manila started paying tribute to China, and it was followed in 1405. This was the time of the Muslim Chinese navigator Cheng Hu when he came to Southeast Asia, encouraging neighboring countries to send tributes to China. And at some point in time, he also established an office for the overseas Chinese in Manila at the time. So even during this period, you can see Manila emerged as one of the important trading ports in the international maritime trade at that time. And then from our interaction with Chinese, we also learned some aspects of their life and civilization. For example, the culinary habits, architectural design, and some languages also. And many of the Philippines' founding fathers, including the late national hero Dr. Rizal, Rizal were of Chinese descent. Unfortunately, these things are not highlighted in many published literatures in the country. So I consider this as a first layer of civilizational nurturing that, in a way, started to enrich and elevate the early Filipinos' way of life. And then came Islam as the second layer of civilization. But before I'm going to talk about how Islam came to Manila, I was informed that I need to give a little background about what Islam as a religion is all about. Islam, a religion, derives from the word salam, which means peace. And this is where many scholars believe that the Tagalog word salamat came from Malay selamat, the word selamat of the Malay came from Arabic word salam, which is the root word of Islam as a religion. It means peace, and the meaning of Islam is a complete submission to the will of God. For the Muslims, Islam is not a new religion. It is the religion of all prophets, because in Islam you find the stories of all prophets, and they are described as people who have completely submitted to the will of God. So, in a way, they were all Muslims, so to speak. And the Quran says, for each community we have appointed a divine law and a way. It is in this aspect that Muslims believe there are many messengers sent by God to many parts of the world, thousands of them. And the Prophet Muhammad came to complete this evolution of religion, so to speak. And it was during his time that the so-called deen or religion was perfected, and it was named, as far as the Quran is concerned, as Islam. And this is reflected in the verse, "This day I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you and have approved for you Islam as your religion." So Islam as a religion was not named by any person. It was named by God as reflected in the Holy Quran. So it was Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century Medina who actually founded. All the Muslims do not say he founded, because it's the religion since time immemorial, but it was during his time that it was completed. And the Holy Quran speaks about the many messengers sent to each community. For example, this particular verse, the Quran says, "To every people we have sent a messenger." It is in this respect that Islam can connect to various spiritual traditions. At some point in time, Buddha, for example, was declared one of the messengers sent by God to that part of the world. Muhammad was the last and the final prophet in the chain of the prophethood, as foretold in the old scriptures. And he himself said that my position in relation to the other prophets is like this. A man built a house, completing it and adoring it, well, except for a place of one brick. When the people entered the house, they marveled at its beauty and said, "But for the place of this one brick, how much more splendid the house will be." So in the Quran, the Muslims are commanded to believe on the teachings of Prophet Muhammad and the teachings of the previous prophet. The Quran says, "The pious among you are those who believe in you," referring to the Prophet Muhammad, "and those who believe before you." That means the Muslims should believe on the previous teachings of Jesus, Moses, and many other prophets that God sent to the world. The Holy Quran is the primary source of knowledge of the Muslims. It means a recitation. The first revelation that was revealed to Prophet Muhammad when he was 6 years old, when he was contemplating inside the cave of Hira in Mecca. Gabriel appeared to him and asked him to recite, to read, Iqra. This is the first revelation. And this sense of reading became the foundation of Islam. That is, Islam promotes the searching of knowledge. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Seek knowledge from cradle to grave." That means the seeking of knowledge is endless, because the Quran says, even if you can convert the entire ocean into an ink and all the leaves into paper and write down the knowledge of God, still it is not sufficient. So that's how vast the knowledge of God is. And the whole of the Quran is composed of 114 chapters of over 6,000 verses, revealed to Prophet Muhammad in a span of over 23 years. And it is a complete book as far as the Muslims are concerned, because it contains the messages of the previous prophets. You find the teachings of Jesus in the Quran. You find the teachings of Moses in the Quran. You find the story of the miraculous birth of Jesus and the story of Mary in the Quran. In fact, the Quran contains one chapter named after Mary. It is the final revelation It is the complete guide to the Muslims because it speaks about the inheritance. It speaks about the rights of a husband over the wife and vice versa. It speaks about how the nature continuously glorify God. It contains some aspects of astronomy, astrology, mathematics. So it's a complete guide. The Muslims need not to refer to any other books but the Quran as the primary source of knowledge. Now, the Quran is the miracle of Prophet Muhammad. Every prophet, as told in Islam, has their own miracle. Moses divided the sea. Jesus, peace be upon him, he has that healing power. And for Prophet Muhammad, his greatest miracle is the Holy Quran. Because the Holy Quran is the word of God, and it is told in the Quran, even if the whole of mankind and jinn were to gather together to produce the like of this Quran, even the shortest verse in the Holy Quran, they could not produce the like thereof, even if they backed up each other. The same Quran that was revealed in 7th century is the same Quran that the Muslims of today are using. It was not revised, it was not edited. It survived, and it remains relevant to different kinds of era that we witness. So the Muslims, they are the people who completely submit to the will of God. Complete submission, that means you give everything to God. You live your life in the framework of the teachings of the Quran, because the Quran teaches the Muslims how to pray, how to treat the neighbors, how to divide the inheritance, how to work, how to deal with the leaders, how to deal with their wives and children, how to do business, and so on and so forth. So complete submission to the will of God means living your entire life within the mosque and outside the mosque in accordance with the rules and teachings of the Quran. The Muslims, they are the people who perform the basic 5 pillars of Islam. This is they utter Shahada. Shahada is a witnessing, that they witness that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the last messenger. They pray 5 times a day. Early morning, yung first prayer. Noon, tanghali, yung second prayer. Mid-afternoon, yung third prayer. 6 o'clock, or immediately after sundown, sunset, yung fourth prayer. 7:30, yung fifth prayer. And when they pray, every time they pray, they wash their hands, their face, and other parts of the body, feet, etc. So they fast during the month of Ramadan. This is 1 month of the entire year where the Muslims during the day do not eat, do not drink, do not engage in any activities that are discouraged by the Quran, like gambling, etc. And they also give zakat. Zakat is alms. 2.5% of the net income of the Muslims should go to 8 different kinds of people. These are orphans, widowed, scholars, yung mga taong baon sa utang na hindi na makabayad. They are part of the beneficiaries of the alms of the Muslims, the travelers, stranded travelers, and others. And the last pillar of Islam is that the Muslims are encouraged to do a pilgrimage to Mecca, because this is the traditions of the Prophet, which started by Prophet Abraham. The Muslims believe in one God, the angels. This third part is what is known as the 6 articles of faith. One article is that they believe in one God, they believe in all the angels, they believe in the Holy Scriptures, not just the Quran. But when we speak about Holy Scriptures in Islam, it includes the Torah, the Gospel, the Psalm of David, and the Quran. And they all believe in the prophets. That means They do not only believe in Prophet Muhammad, but they all believe in Prophet Jesus, Prophet Moses, and all those famous 25 prophets. That is why every Muslim knows Jesus Christ as a prophet. And they also believe that there is a day of judgment and the predestination. This means that the blessings and the misfortune both came from God. So when Muslims are struck with calamity, for example, namatayan sila ng nanay, nawalan sila ng pera, nasunugan sila ng bahay, they would always say, we come from God, and to Him we will return. Because this is part of their belief in the sixth article of faith, which is the predestination. Now, this is the God of Islam. Allah is the name, which means the one God. This is composed of 4 letters, ALLH or Alif Lam Lam. Now, the magic of this name is that if you remove A or the first letter Alif, still the meaning remains to be one, and so forth. The God of Islam is unique. That means you cannot compare Him to, for example, the sun. You cannot say God is like the sun shining. No, He is beyond that. He is beyond comparison. The Quran says, Ammayus rikun. Subhanallahi ammayus rikun. Glory be to Allah, who is beyond description. This God of Islam is also beyond human conception. You cannot think of Him as something or someone sitting on the throne. No, He is beyond whatever we can imagine. He is transcendent. At the same time, He is also immanent. So this makes the God of Islam as someone personal. That means when we pray to God, we pray to Him directly because we know He told us in the Quran that while He is high above, beyond human conception, beyond the reach of human intelligence, He is also closer to us than our neck veins. So the Quran speaks about وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ, and He is closer to you than your neck veins. So that means wala tayong pagitan ng Diyos. He is immanent. His presence is dominating in the entire universe. So the Muslims are brought to this knowledge that God is both high above and also here with us. And the other verse of the Quran says, wheresoever you turn, there is His face. I think this is the same in what the Bible says as the kingdom of God is within you and all around you. And God is where His kingdom is. So if His kingdom is everywhere, so He is also everywhere. Before I'm going to talk about how it came to Manila, I want to point out that Islam and Christianity are closely intertwined. It's not a totally different religions. It's not alien to each other. As far as Islam is concerned, historically and theologically, it is closely intertwined with Christianity. For example, historically, the first person to recognize Muhammad to be a prophet when he was just a young boy at the age of 9, some said 8, was a Syrian Christian monk. When they went to Syria to do business, he went with his uncle, who was the leader of the caravan. And the Syrian Christian monk saw some signs on the young Muhammad, and he called on him and looked at the symbol in his chest, and that Syrian Christian monk by the name of Bahira said, as far as the old scripture is concerned, how the old scripture described the coming of the last Messiah, it refers to this young boy. Theologically, like I mentioned earlier, every Muslim knows Jesus. There is one chapter in the Quran that is named after Mary. The miraculous birth of Jesus Christ is also told in the Quran. So, theologically and historically, we are very close to each other. But despite of that, the meeting of Islam and Christianity in Manila resulted in the bitter warfare, which I will talk about later on. So Islam was born in Arabia in 7th century, And immediately during the first generation of Islam, it has reached China. And from China, it slowly penetrated the Southeast Asian archipelago. There was a rebellion in China in 878 when hundreds of thousands of Muslims were massacred, and thousands of them fled to Kalang in the western part of Malaysia to found another principality, and from where they slowly came to the Philippines. As early as 10th century, there was already a presence of Muslims in the country, and this was revealed by Chinese account that in 982 AD there was an Arab ship from Mindoro that went to China, bringing Mindoro goods. To Arabic sources, to Arab sources and Muslim scholars, they say that the name Manila actually came from the word Amanillah, a name given by the Arabs, which means in the safety of Allah. Unfortunately, the literatures that talk about this were never made available in the Philippines. And then Islam came to Manila on the second stage via the Tausug traders and preachers at the height of the Sulu Sultanate in 1405. Despite of Islam's presence as early as 982 AD, there was no account of missionary activities in the country. The Muslims simply came to trade with the early Filipinos, and there might have been some philosophical exchange, but it was not yet seen and felt among the early Filipinos. The spread of Islam took place at the last quarter of 12th century in Sulu archipelago. Muslim preachers started to arrive and preach Islam. How Islam was taught in that southern parts of the country was through primarily because the Muslim preachers possess a more advanced knowledge than the natives. As we have seen earlier, the early Filipinos, including those people in the southern parts, were already exposed to some kind of a universalistic religion brought about by the Indians and the Chinese. And there was already a deeper sense of religion and spirituality as taught by the Indian sages and spiritual masters. But the Muslims, when they came, these Muslim preachers, they possess even more higher level of learning, which made them successful in their introduction of Islam. The second theory of how it was spread was through intermarriage, and another one was through spiritual power. Those Muslim preachers who came to bring Islam to Sulu were spiritual adepts, they were spiritual masters, and they were endowed with spiritual powers. They can walk on water, they can heal people from a distance. We call it today as astral healing, and this is how Islam was slowly embraced by the people. The Jesuit priest Francisco Combes, when he came in the 7th century, witnessed some of the magical powers of those Muslim preachers who came to Sulu. So Sulu was Islamized. It took more than 100 years for the Islamization process to be completed. It culminated in 1405 when Sulu Sultanate was established, and the Islamization process was completed. From Sulu, it slowly penetrated to mainland Mindanao via Zamboanga area, and then to Lanao, what is today the Maranao people in Marawi, through intermarriages of the Maranao Datus and the Muslim Maguindanao at the time. In 1515, the Sultanate of Maguindanao was established. So at the height of Sulu power, during the establishment of its Sultanate, the Tausug people were everywhere in the country. They were participating actively in the inter-island sea trade, and to some extent, they were leading in the inter-island trade. The map of the network of the Majapahit business network of the distribution of goods, I wish I can show it, but I wasn't able to include here, shows that all goods coming from Southeast Asian neighbors and entering the country would arrive first in Sulu before it will be distributed to other parts of the country like Manila, Cebu, and other important trading ports. So at that particular time, from 11 1100 to 1450, the Tausug people were actively engaged in the inter-island and at some point in time leading in the inter-island trade port. And they came to Manila, and there were many parts of the country that became tributary state of the Sulu Sultanate. Mindoro, for example, became one of the vassal states of the Sulu Sultanate. They enjoyed protection from the Sulu Sultan. And as expected, these economic interactions of the Tausug with the early Filipinos also came with philosophical exchange. The Tausug, now being Islamized, began to teach Islam to the not yet Islamized people in those important trading ports like Manila. For example, the name Quiapo is derived from the Tausug word kayapo, which means mushroom. Tondo is from the Tausug tando, which means tulo. This is from the Tausug historical narratives. Nabotas is from the Tausug nabutas, which means nahiwalay. Malabon is from the Tausug malabong, which means grassy. Probably at that time, that particular area was full of grass. So there are evidences of the Tausug teaching Islam to other people in the country, as can be seen later on the last part of my presentation. So that was the second stage of Islam's entry to Manila by the Tausug traders. Then that initial introduction of Islam was accelerated by the coming of the Brunei royalty. In Southeast Asia, there was a great Islamic empire rose after the Islamization process, the Malaccan Empire. Fortunately, it was toppled down by the Portuguese in 1511, and that led to the rise of many smaller principalities that emerged as a power center and knowledge center. And one of those emerging countries was Brunei. Brunei came to power after the collapse of Malacca Islamic Empire in 1515. And in 1520, as far as historical narratives is concerned, Brunei Sultan took over Manila. Manila at the time was an aging Hindu kingdom. There was a Hindu kingdom in Santa Ana, which was previously called the Namayan Kingdom. It was merged into the royal Brunei royalty and transformed into a Islamic principality, which was ruled by Raj Suleiman, one of the descendants of the Brunei royalty, and also related to the Sulu royalty because there was an intermarriage. So during this time, there was a triangular connection between the Manila Sulu and the Islamic State of Brunei. During this period, the Brunei Sultan brought in some missionaries from Brunei, and these missionaries reached as far as Batangas, Bulacan, Pampanga, Iloilo, Cebu, Mindoro, and Butuan. It has to be noted that during this period, Islam was already well established in Sulu and mainland Mindanao, inhabited by the Maranao people and the Maguindanao people in the mainland Mindanao. So the other phase of spread of Islam took place from Manila going to the Visayas areas. From Manila to neighboring areas like Batangas, Bulacan, towards Cebu, Mindoro, Butuan, Iloilo. And according to Spanish historians, had the Spaniards' arrival delayed for 50 years, the entire country would have been Islamized. Unfortunately, the slow spread of Islam in the Visayas and some parts of Luzon happened simultaneously with the coming of the Spaniards. So this is the statue of Raj Suleiman. And this map, I took it from the internet, shows the area controlled by Raj Suleiman and Raja Matanda and Lakandula in Tondo, which is encircled in red. Actually, the Muslim principalities that were Islamized during that time include all the way to Pasig and Laguna. This is revealed by the testimony of Magat China, one of those followers of Raja Sulaiman. Okay, by the time the Spaniards came, there was already a growing civilization in the country. And this is depicted in the Baxter Codex. This is also known as the Manila manuscript written in 1590. So Manila at the time and other parts of Luzon and Visayas were experiencing the second stage of civilizational nurturing by Islam and by the Muslims. And we have to remember that the Indians, the Chinese, and the Muslims came to trade, not to conquer, not to monopolize trading networks, not to impose their own religion and civilization. But the introduction, the transfer of knowledge took place along with our economic interaction with them. So there was some kind of a flawless transfer of this advanced civilization to a lesser advanced civilization, which was the early Filipinos in the country. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, the spread of Islam happened simultaneously with the coming of the Spaniards. Now, despite of the closeness of Islam to Christianity, the meeting of Legazpi, Goite, and Suleiman in Manila resulted in a bitter war simply because Spain was ruled by the Moors, from where the Moros, referring to the Muslims in the Philippines, was named. The Spain was ruled by the Moors for nearly 800 years. And this is a very significant part in the history of the world, when there was a transfer of knowledge from the Greeks to the Arabs. From the Arabs, it was brought to Spain. From the Spain, it was brought to Europe, which gave birth to European Renaissance that eventually led into a scientific and industrial revolution. I would encourage our listeners to watch the documentary film entitled When the Moors Ruled Europe. This is available in YouTube for free. This is a documentary film done by some European scholars. And in that documentary film, you can see how Spain was Islamized, how Spain was transformed into a civilization, how the knowledge of the Greeks, of the Chinese, of the Egyptians that was developed by the Arabs brought to Spain, and how those knowledge during the what they call La Reconquista, or the reconquest of of Spain from the hands of the Muslims. Those knowledge were brought to Europe, and from that triggered and gave birth to the European Renaissance, and finally the scientific and industrial revolution. But another most significant part to take note in the history of Islamic Spain is that on the last part of the Moors state in Spain, there was the reconquest by the Christian Spaniards, that is to take back the lands of Spain from the hands of the Moors. On the last part of the La Reconquista, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella organized what they call the Inquisition. Inquisition is a religious organization purposely to make Catholicism as the only religion in Spain, and to punish and force to convert those who were not Catholics, the Protestants, the Jews, and the Muslims. The last part of the Inquisition was directed against the Muslims in the last Islamic kingdom of Spain, which was Granada at the time. And for more than 300 years of the La Reconquest towards the bitter establishment of the Inquisition, the Christian Spaniards were locked up with the war against the Muslim Spaniards. So these are both Spaniards with different religions fighting each other by blood and DNA. And during the last period of Inquisition, the Spanish government expelled nearly 250,000 of the Muslims from Granada. They were forced to convert. Those who did not convert, those who refused, were expelled. And more than 300,000 of the Muslims, these are Spanish Muslims, were expelled out of Spain at the time. And when they were expelled, they were not allowed to bring anything except with what's in their self. That means their own clothes. So they cannot bring their goods, their food, and etc. And they sought refuge in the desert of Africa. That was a very bitter and bloody history of Spain, of Christian Spaniards and the Muslim Spaniards. When they were still in the process of expelling the Muslims in the Granada, that was the time when the Spaniards came to the Philippines. So they came to the country when the characteristic of Inquisition was still alive in their consciousness. And when they saw Muslims in Manila, the hatred and prejudice and their memories of bitter wars with the Muslims in Spain was in a way revived in their consciousness. And as resulted, as one Spanish historian would say, the meeting of these two people resulted into a bitter war, which ended with the defeat of Raj Suleiman in 1571 Battle of Pangkusay. There is a story of the battle, how Raj Suleiman was defeated, but I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I can share some reading materials later on for those listeners who would like to learn more of this particular period in history. Suleiman stood his ground, but he was defeated because simply Islamic Principality in Manila at the time was not as solid compared to the Sulu Sultanate and the Sultanate of Maguindanao. So it was easy for the Spaniards to defeat the Muslims. And after their defeat, it became easy for the Spaniards to spread Catholicism, to convert the natives to Catholicism. In the process of evangelization of the Spaniards in the country, in Manila, the Spaniards, especially those scholars who were mostly priests, they promoted what they call, or what we call, the bipartite historical narrative. What is the bipartite historical narrative? To the Spaniards, before they came, the Philippines was in a dark age. So that means the interaction of our early ancestors with the Indians and Chinese and Islam, and their learning from those civilizations was declared as a period belonging to the dark age in the country, and that the beginning of civilization took place with their arrival. So that means the history of the Philippines is the history of the Spain in the country. They came with a self-declared mission of bringing salvation and civilization to the not yet civilized and the not yet saved people in the country. And they were at some point in time empowered by the Papal Bull of 1493, and they came with the ethnocentric attitude that only the Western civilization is superior, and the Papal Bull empowered them and inspired them to think that only Catholicism is the only way to salvation. So that means they they went to different parts of the country and of the world, including the Philippines, to bring the message of salvation to the and civilization to the not yet civilized people. So they came with the idea that those people who are not yet Catholics, and those people who have not yet brought into the Western civilizations, are inferior and savage and not civilized. And this is when the pre-Hispanic civilization of the country, especially in Manila, was lost. Now, in the course of their stay, they further attempted to conquer Sulu and Mindanao because it was the Muslims, the same people they fought in Spain, who stood as the main obstacle to their economic ambition in the country. So these Muslims should be made slaves as far as the order of the king and other priors are concerned, to make them slaves and to make their communities, their areas, a vassal state of Spain. And this is what the Muslims cannot accept. That these new people, foreigners, would come and say, you are now part of the vassal state of Spain and you have to pay tribute to the Muslims and you have to abandon your religion and embrace this new religion. The Muslims in Mindanao and in Sulu and even Raj Suleiman knew well what happened to the people in Cebu, how they have been betrayed by the Spaniards. And so the Muslims in Mindanao, including Raj Suleiman and those Muslims in Sulu, did not submit to this Spanish imposition of their religion and civilization. Now, during the campaign, unfortunately, they utilized the native converts as a military to fight against the Muslims in the south. And this is when the hatred and animosity and prejudice started, which remains alive until today. And the Moros were portrayed as savage and pirates. Jesuit priests started to come up with a play. They called it a Moro Moro play, where the Muslims were often portrayed as the enemy, and that the war would always result into the victory of a Christian Spaniards as a hero, and sometimes resulted into the Muslim princess falling in love with Spanish soldiers. And this is how they inculcated the what we call the black propaganda in the minds of the native converts at the particular time. Now, for the longest time, for more than 3 centuries, our ancestors at that particular time lived in that kind of understanding, in that kind of historical narratives, that it is the Spaniards brought civilization, that it is the Spaniards brought salvation to the country. Until the last part of the Spanish era, when there were many mestizos who have been educated in Europe, which later on became the thinkers of the propaganda movement and the revolution, and this includes Jose Rizal and many others, saw the negative implications of the Spanish bipartite historical narrative. So they attempted to produce a counter vision of native interpretation of history, and this is what our scholars would call us the tripartite historical production. The tripartite historical vision brings back the pre-Hispanic civilization. They were saying, no, before the coming of the Spaniards, there was a civilization. We have been interacting with Japan and China to some extent. But if you look at how they attempted to rectify the bipartite Spain's historical narrative, they did not include the legacies of Islam in the country. It seems that they forgot that just before the coming of the Spaniards, Manila was Islamized, or probably the thinkers at that time, the thinkers of the propaganda movement, were also victims of the Spanish black propaganda of the Muslims. Because how the Muslims responded to Spanish conquest was that they raided Christian settlements for more than 100 years, took many slaves to Mindanao and sold them. And this was one of the bitter parts in the history of the country. For more than 1 century, Muslims would come to Christian areas, burn their plantations, take all the males, and sold them to Dutch and other foreigners. So probably because of that bitter incident, the thinkers of the propaganda movement felt the hatred of the Spaniards and other Filipinos towards the Muslims. So when they resurfaced, the pre-Hispanic civilization, they did not include the legacies of Islam. And this tripartite historical narratives was integrated in the rights and ideologies of the Katipunan. Before you enter the Katipunan group, you have to be educated what happened to the country before the coming of the Spaniards, what happened to the country during the time of the Spaniards, and what happened to the country after this Spanish occupation. So it in a way inspired the Katipuneros to revolt against the Spain. But it has to be noted there was a significant difference between the ideologies of the Katipuneros and those of the Ilustrados. The Ilustrados remained captive to the idea that Spain is superior and that we have to remain under Spain, but we have to reform the church because the church became the tool for how do you say that? For the church really intervened in many affairs of the government, and the friars were so corrupt, the friars were so cruel that led both the Katipuneros and the propaganda thinkers to reform the church, that is to liberate the church from the hands of the Spaniards. For the Katipuneros, their agenda was to completely emancipate the country from the hands of Spain. So that means go back to the pre-Hispanic way of life. And during the course of the revolution, they have killed many priests and burned many churches and so on. Unfortunately, Rizal died, Andres Bonifacio was executed. So the vision of a pluralistic society, the vision of a new community, the vision of regaining the ancient heritage was lost, and it was unfortunately outlived by the coming of the American occupation. So it was not fulfilled, it was not continued, it was supplanted or outlived by the Western narratives that the Americans came to save us from Spain, that the Americans came to spread the boons of liberty, of democracy, that the Americans came to train us in the science of self-government as they declared in their Manifest Destiny. But the dominance of the Western thoughts, the imposition of English language as a medium of instruction, the feeling of American textbooks that is filled with stories of American heroes, according to some Filipino scholars, made Filipinos alien or foreigners in their own land. And this resulted into what Renate Constantino would call as the miseducation of the Filipino people. And this happened all throughout the 60s. And during this period, the legacies of Islam and the previous civilizations were deeply buried and lost in the memory of the Filipino people. Until 60s, what I call the secondary awakening, when nationalist scholars began to challenge the relevance of Western thoughts in understanding the way of life of the Filipino people. To them, it doesn't make sense. You understand your own way of life from the lenses of other people. from the concepts and methodologies of other people, particularly the Western people. So they started now the indigenization movement, that is rediscovering Filipino thoughts, indigenous thoughts and psychologies and philosophies and all those knowledge, and it resulted into a body of knowledge, indigenous knowledge, which are now, I would say, dominating in the consciousness of uh, the Filipino people. Now, what is interesting about this secondary awakening is the new vision or the vision of a new society by President Marcos, the Bagong Lipunan. Marcos also tried to reconstruct history against what he calls as the national identity crisis. And along this program, he and many other scholars managed to produce in 19 volume history book entitled Castellana. But because Marcos was hosted the books he produced, along with many Filipino scholars, were not popularized. I did not even learn it in school. But the most important part in the secondary awakening in this period, especially during the time of President Marcos, was the recognition of Muslims' history as part of nation's history. For the longest time, the history, the heritage, the belief of the Muslims were set aside, and there were even attempts by the Americans, by the Spaniards, by the early Filipino politicians during the Commonwealth, all the way to post-independence and independence and post-independence. Attempts were made to take out Islam from the lives of the Muslims and to make them subordinate to the Christian Filipinos. It was during this time, during Marcos' time, particularly in 1982, when he came up with the letter of instruction number 1221 to enhance the nation's Islamic heritage. Actually, this letter of instruction was part of Marcos' program to appease rebellion in Mindanao, because during this period there was already a war going on in Mindanao, and to accommodate the grievances of the Muslims, one of those programs is the recognition and in a way integration of Islamic heritage to the nation's heritage. And like I said, Marcos' vision of new society was not materialized. The books that was published during his time were not popularized in schools. But the idea of looking back or redirecting the Filipino intellectuality to what we call the original values and psychology and philosophy of the Filipino people continues up to the present time. And the initiative that he started to accommodate the history of the Muslims, to recognize the faith of the Muslims, were followed by the succeeding administrations. For example, the 1987 Constitution contains some provisions to develop and recognize the faith and history of the indigenous people, which includes the Muslims. In 2006, for example, the oldest mosque in the country that was built in 1380 was declared as part of nation's historical, national historical shrine during the time of President Oreo. So it was carried on. Those programs of Marcos, those initiatives were carried on by the succeeding administrations, which developed progressively on how we look at the Muslims and their history as part of the country's Muslims. Now, why do we do that? Because the history of Islam in our country, particularly in Manila, remains to be relevant until today, simply because those legacies of Islam in the country remains alive in the language, in the psychology, spirituality, and way of life of the Filipino people. And this happened because of the Muslims' stay in Manila. And through the history of Muslims in Manila, we can have a glimpse of the enduring legacies of Islam in the country. For example, our concept of moral development is nurtured and taught to us by the Muslims before we were taught by the Spaniards. In fact, according to Rizal, the Spaniards did not really teach us the right conduct, did not really teach us about enlightenment, because uh, Catholicism was utilized by the Spaniards instead to control us, to conquer us. It was the Muslims in pre-Hispanic time who uh, taught us more about respect to the elders, about the concept of moral development, and this is seen in the language. For example, the word asal, pagandang asal. Asal is from Arabic asli, which means nature. So when we speak about humanity, we say from the indigenous Filipino point of view, humanity is inherently good, and that is from the Islamic point of view, in contrast to the original sin of uh, the Catholicism. The word opo, pasintabi, these are Malay words that we borrowed from the Malay Muslims. We have so many words from Arabic and Malay we can list down to show that the legacies of Islam remain alive until today, and that we need to rediscover if we are to learn to embrace each other, regardless of religion, whether you are Muslims or Christians. Other examples are sipat. This is a hard word Tagalog, sipat, which means you examine the attributes, the characteristic of a certain individual. And this Tagalog word sipat is from Arabic sifat, which means attributes. Simbahan. Simbahan is from the root word simba, which means to pray, is derived from the Malay word sumba, which means also to pray. Sumba taken from Arabic sabba, to glorify or also to pray. The word saliksik, or research, in the Tagalog word, I would assume, must have been derived from the Arabic word salik. Salik means a truth seeker, someone who is seeking God. If this is correct, then we can say the sense of doing research, the idea of doing research of the Filipino people is not actually just learning knowledge, but finding God. Another word is kaalaman, which is from Arabic ilm, kaluluwa from Arabic ruh, and many, many others. In terms of psychology and spirituality, the word ginhawa, which was promoted by many scholars to replace the word spiritu, which means spirit, is derived from Arabic hawa, which means air or life or desire. The prefix gin is borrowed from the Tausug, gin, which means the entirety. So when you say ginhawa, the entirety of life, the entirety of self. The concept of kapwa, which was popularized by the father of Filipino psychology, Enriquez. This is a shared identity, seeing others as your own self, reflects the concept of Tawhid in Islam, that everything is interconnected, everything is one, everything is just a reflection of the beauty of the one God, and so on. There are still a lot more that we can list down here, but I think this suffice to make us understand that Islam and the history of the Muslims are not alien to us. It's part of who we are as a Filipino people. In fact, I would always say that learning Islam and the history of the Muslims in this country is even making you a better Christians, because you can discover how good you are as a Filipino people by learning the history of the Muslims and their faith, which is Islam. Now, what is the status of the history of the Muslims in Manila and the entire country? Like I said, the initiative of President Marcos of accommodating or including the country's Islamic heritage was carried on by the succeeding administrations until during the time of Pinoy, there was a bill which is known as the Integrated History Act, Republic Act 10986, mandating the integration of Filipino Muslim and indigenous people's history, culture, and identity in the study of the Philippine history in both basic and higher education. Although this bill is yet to be implemented, but this is a promising bill to break down the walls of the Muslims and Christians, to re-educate both the Muslims and the Christians of their shared values, of their shared history, of their shared civilization. And we hope if this will be implemented, and we are working on this, it will have a very good impact insofar as bringing the different groups of people in the country together as a necessary tool. I would always say a necessary tool for nation building. So thank you. I would end my lecture there. If you have further comments and questions for additional readings, you can contact my number, my email, and also my Facebook account. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Absari, for that very interesting presentation. Sir, here's, yeah. So here is the details of Professor Absari. So you can contact him in his email. Yes, so now we are going to open our open forum for our viewers for today. But before we start that, here are some reminders first. So I'd like to remind everyone that if you have any questions, feel free to raise them. So if you are viewing via Zoom, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You just key in your question in the Q&A button. If, on the other hand, you are viewing via Facebook, you can raise your questions in the comment section of our live feed. Right, so...
can I now close my PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Not yet. Okay. Thank you.
Sir, it's very interesting that you mentioned earlier about Marcos' new vision for the new society against the so-called national identity crisis.
Yes.
But there's, I think, even a book for that which encapsulate all of his, all of the narrative from that era. So I think the title is Tadhana, right?
Yes, Tadhana.
So, in your opinion, Professor, how important is Islamic history in the Philippines, or how important is Islamic heritage in promoting the so-called idea of Marcos' glorious past?
Well, Marcos' glorious past is not Marcos, so to speak. It's the unfulfilled vision of Rizal, and it is the lost heritage of the entire Filipino people. That is to say, if we were not be able to recover it, we cannot establish who we are as a Filipino people, because the pre-Hispanic civilization is an important component of who we are. If we are to discover what is it to be a Filipino. During this pandemic, there are many positive traits coming out, the bayanihan, etc. These are the attributes, these are the attitudes, the original Filipino values that were brought to us by the Indians, by the Chinese, and more particularly by Islam. So it is important because it is who we are. Without recognizing it, without rediscovering it, the sense of identity and our desire to rediscover who we are will be of no direction.
Thank you, sir. Earlier, you've shown a page from the Boxer Codex.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any Islamic tradition brought by Muslim traders or missionaries that was directly translated in the local clothing? Because as we can notice in the depictions of the clothes of the natives before, it is quite different from what we perceive today as the usual modest clothing of Islam. So, was there any Islamic tradition that was directly translated in the local clothing during the pre-colonial era?
Well, you can look at it from how Islam was understood by the natives at the time. Islam, the kind of Islam that was brought to us was kind of Islam that is tolerant, a kind of Islam that does not destroy a culture. So there was no imposition of clothing, there was no imposition of language. The Muslims did not come and say you should change how you dress, you should speak Arabic, you should cover your entire self. Simply, the Muslims came to introduce Islam to further elevate the way of life of the people at that time. So um, it was on the initiatives of the Muslims to change how they dress. If you look at the Boxer Codex and you compare how the Muslims look like today, you cannot say those people in the Boxer Codex were not Muslim by how they dress. Because the Muslims of today, they would dress like they are totally covered. Even how Raj Suleiman was portrayed in his statue in Manila as wearing bahag. To some Muslim scholars would say that is a misrepresentation. But probably what has been portrayed was that Raj Suleiman going to the battle. And if you go to the battle, you won't go dress the same way when you go to prayer, for example. When you're at home, so you dress in a very comfortable way when you fight, for example, and that would probably explain why he wears like bahag, that the same with the ancient Filipinos. So um, I I cannot say there was a direct influence of how the dress should be for the Muslims in that particular time, because the kind of Islam that was introduced was not on the legal aspect, but it is more of a spiritual aspect. That means the target of the Muslim preachers is the heart and mind of the natives, to make them enlightened and to make them realize who God is as a foundation of establishing a civilization.
Thank
I
you,
don't
sir.
know if I answer your question right.
And I think papasok na rin dito yung concept of folk Islam,
Mm.
so how it was interpreted in the local context. So, uh, yeah.
Okay. Well, the idea of folk Islam came uh, very recent. Um, from from the 13th or from the last part of the 12th century, when Islam was initially introduced, up to the 1950s, there was no sense of idea of folk Islam. People live their lives that they are Muslims, and they adhere to the teachings of Islam. There was no issue of you belong to other sect of Islam, we belong to other sect of Islam. There was some kind of a unified understanding of Islam at the time, and the kind of Islam that was practiced from the last part of the 11th century up to the 1950s was um, viewed as a syncretic Islam. That is, it carried on some practices of the previous civilizations. So, if you look at Islam in Mindanao, you find the remnants of Hindu practices, you find the remnants of Taoist practices, not just in their practices, but even in their language, for example. The Muslims call the religion Agama, and Agama is not Arabic, Agama is Sanskrit. So, when there was a reform movement that took place in Arabia in the 18th century, and it was brought to our country in the early 80s, that's when nagkaroon na ng, oops, yan ay folk Islam dahil parang Hindu practice pa yan, so wag mo na yan gawin. So remnants of previous practices from previous civilizations that that survived, those were the ones that were declared as folk Islam. Like for example, sa Sulu, very famous yung maliligo sa dagat in a particular month, in a particular day. They call it tulak bala. Tulak is push, bala, these are misfortunes. Maliligo sila ng dagat, merong Muslim priest, babasahan sila, paliliguan sila, and they would throw stones to the ocean with the intention and idea that the sins, all the misfortunes are thrown away along with the throwing of stones. And this practice is considered as folk Islam, or even un-Islamic by the reformers of the latest generation of religious scholars. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we have a question from Facebook. So this person is asking about Quiapo. So apart from Quiapo, what other areas in Manila are can be said to be Islamic communities? This question is very interesting, actually. And if I may add, why do you think Quiapo came to be a major Islam community in Manila, despite the fact that it is one of the biggest pilgrimage sites of Catholicism in the country? So, if you're going to look at it, it's quite interesting to note that you have here the Nazarene Basilica on one side, separated by a boulevard. Then, once you cross that boulevard, you are immediately in the vicinity of the largest mosque in Metro Manila. So, that's a very interesting context in Quiapo. How do you think that developed? Now, in this very Catholic community, there emerged the biggest Muslim community in Manila. And from the question in Facebook, is there any other major Muslim communities in Manila aside from Quiapo?
Well, in pre-Hispanic time, we find Tondo, for example. Tondo was ruled by Raja Matanda in Lakandula. Pasig was part of the bigger Islamic principality. That is why Islamic legacies also survive in that particular area in Pasig. Yung tawag nila sa tunog ng kampana sa simbahan ay bang, B-A-N-G, bang, and that's how the Muslims call to prayer, call it. Pasig and all the way to Laguna. Itong mga particularly yung mga coastal areas. These were the areas controlled by the Muslim rulers in pre-Hispanic time. Now, with regards to, of course, it was transforming into the Islamic principality. Some parts in the coastal areas of Butuan, Mindoro, Oton, Bonbon, there were significant numbers of Muslims at that time in pre-Hispanic time. But like I said, the growth of Islam and the development of Muslim communities were halted with the coming of the Spaniards, and it was replaced by Catholicism. With regards to the second question, why emerged a Muslim community at the heart of a Christian pilgrimage site? The establishment of Muslim community took place during the time of President Marcos, because Muslims were fighting the government for independence. It's a long story why the Muslims continue to fight until today. It all began in the fight between Raj Suleiman and Goite and Legazpi. When Marcos negotiated with the Moro fighters in Mindanao, the Libyan government brokered the peace negotiations, and the Libyan government invested so much money. The Libyan government, during the time of presidency of Muammar Gaddafi, gave so much money to our government to bring reforms to Mindanao. And as part of Marcos' reconciliation program, he bought a Muslim community in Quiapo, in Taguig, which is now known today as the Maharlika village, and in Quezon City in Tandang Sora. So, binili niya yon at tinayuan niya ng mosque, ng Islamic Center, to somehow somehow show to other Muslim countries, Arabia, Iran, and many others, that while on one hand he was fighting the Muslims, he was also doing good for the development of the lives of the Muslims by establishing a mosque, by building a mosque, by establishing a learning center. It was some kind of a Marcos propaganda to show to other Muslim countries and to Muslims in Mindanao that he was not a purely enemy, but he was also doing some good works for the Muslims. And that's how the story of the Golden Mosque in Quiapo. Tatlo yan eh, Golden Mosque in Quiapo, Blue Mosque in Taguig, and then an Islamic community in Tandang Sora in Quezon City.
And I think there's even a mosque in Plaza Miranda.
Plaza Miranda. I don't know about it. maybe not a mosque, but a prayer hall, something.
Yeah.
Or a prayer room. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So we have a question from Gusto Diviana. So good afternoon, Professor Absari. In your presentation, you said Manila was taken over by Brunei. Could it be Manila ruled independently but with close association with Brunei? Since Raha Matanda, when he was a young man in 1521, was married to a princess belonging to the Brunei royal family. So do you have any thoughts on this, sir?
In a way, it is independent. In a way, on the other hand, we can say it was also indirectly under the sovereignty of Brunei Sultanate. Having this link of intermarriages. Even the Sultanate of Sulu at some point in time was under the Sultanate of Brunei before it became an independent Sultanate of Sulu. We can say it was partly an independent Islamic principality. We can also say it is partly under an indirect control of the Brunei Sultanate. And the Manila rulers, especially Raj Suleiman, continued to look up to the Brunei Sultanate as a source of power and ally. In fact, when Legazpi was starting to conquer Manila, Raj Suleiman sought help from the Brunei Sultan, of which the Brunei Sultan mobilized hundreds of ships to be sent to Manila, but it was recalled because the Brunei feared na pag pinadala niya na lahat ng puwersa niya sa Manila, pag siya ngayon ang pinuntahan ng Kastila, wala siyang depensa, kaya ni-recall niya yun. So it's kind of a there was some kind of a solid link between the Brunei, the Manila, and Sulu, and you can look at it from as three independent principalities or as three principalities that are closely interconnected with each other by power and by marriage alliances. Brunei Sultan also married the daughter of Sulu Sultan. There was also a Sulu Sultan that married the sister of a Brunei Sultan. So that was the dynamics of those three ruling states at that time. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, sir. So we have another question from Facebook. This one is from Clang Garcia. Would you have any documentation of tausug dishes prior to the arrival of Spain? I wonder what the Rahas had. I wonder what the food of Raj Suleiman was. So that was that was the question.
I would assume yung mga pagkain nila ay mostly Malay. Just as how the food of the Muslims of today in Mindanao are highly influenced by the Chinese cooking style and Indian, like for example the famous tausug pianggang. This is a grilled chicken cooked with burnt coconut oil. It's an influence of Indian cooking style.
Did they eat,
Probably you can look at it that way.
did they eat pork?
No, no, no. Those uh, yun yung mga isang observation nakita ni Goethe and de Castro. These people, they don't eat pork. They circumcise, nagtutuli sila. They use Muslim names. Therefore, they are the same people with those Muslims who fought in Spain. And that's when they called Raj Suleiman. Actually, the first people to be called Moros were not Muslims in Mindanao, but Raj Suleiman and his followers. They were the first people to be called Moros by the Spaniards. So yun yung na-observe nila. They don't eat pork. They use Muslim name. At circumcise sila. And therefore, they are Muslim. They are like the people we fought in Spain.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Our next question is, by the way, sir, if they did not eat pork, does this mean that the adobo was not from the pre-colonial era? Was it a colonial invention?
I'm not so sure about food actually, honestly. Probably meron ding adobo, but walang adobong pork. Maybe adobong chicken.
Thank you. Our next question is from. Actually, we're out of time. But sir, would you like to extend for another 10 minutes, perhaps?
It's okay for me. It's okay for me. It depends on you. You're the boss.
For another question, this one is from Zoom. It's from Edwin Cabling. So, good PM and peace be upon you. I am Edwin Paul C. Cabling from Baliwag Polytechnic College, Baliwag, Bulacan. Point of inquiry. Is there such a thing as a raginate during the Islamization of Manila? A speaker in a webinar once said that it doesn't exist or it's just an invented term. So if I may add, is the term Rajanate or Raja already existed before it, or was it just an invention we've made as a modern people to define our past?
That's a very interesting and intriguing question. Even before the coming of Islam, there was already a sense of political system that was introduced to us, not by the Muslims, but by the Indians. Remember, in 1365, Manila, Sulu, and other one in Tawi-Tawi, we call it Dungun, were part of the vassal state of the Majapahit Empire. As far as that's a manuscript called Nagara Kirtagama. Nagara Kirtagama, it's a manuscript that mentions various vassal states during the time of Majapahit Empire. Yes, there was indeed a Rajaship. There were indeed Rajas in many parts of the country. Raja Humabon. These are remnants of Indian influence that was integrated to Islamic political system. That is why even the first Sulu Sultan has this title of Sri, which is a Sanskrit title, being integrated to the Sultan, Sri Sultan Mahasari Paduka Shariful Hasim. So there was a merging of various influences into a single identity within the context of political system. Raja. Yes, my answer is yes.
Thank you,
And
sir.
it's up to you for the questioner to which part of historical narratives you believe. If you think it is an invention, it's also good. If you think it really exists, it really existed, it's also good.
Thank you, sir. Michael Joseph Kabawatan is asking about the status of RA 10986.
Yes, the Integrated History Act.
Yeah, so, ano na sir, kumusta sir yung status sa implementation for now?
When I spoke to DepEd and some people in SHED, They told me, we are waiting for you to put substance to that bill and to come up with some ways, good ways to implement it. The status, it's not yet being implemented. We are still working on it, and we are closely coordinating with CHED and DepEd. In fact, a few months ago, before the lockdown, we conducted a roundtable discussions of Philippine historians, Christian Muslims, together, and we tried to look into what can we do about this bill. How do we help in terms of the implementation? How do we help in terms of capacitating Muslim historians? So it's still on the process of implementation. And we hope it will be implemented. It's still in the process of implementation. I spoke to some people in the DepEd and CHED, and they are waiting for us to put substance to that bill, because the bill it's like skeletal. Kumbaga sa bahay, mga haligi-haligi pa lang at saka atip, wala pang masyadong laman. So, nilalamanan pa lang natin at tinitingnan natin paano siya may implement in a more holistic way.
Thank you, sir. So, we have another question. This one was also from Zoom, from Christopher De Jesus. So, pagbati po sa malamang pagtalakay tungkol sa kasaysayan at pamanlahi ng mga kapatid na Muslim. Ang tanong ko po, sa panahon ng Amerikanisasyon ng Pilipinas, ano po ang naging impact ng Bates Treaty sa kulturang kamusliman?
Yung Bates Treaty was initiated by the Americans primarily to neutralize the Muslims and to prevent the Muslims from forging an alliance with the insurrectos or the Philippine revolutionaries, because when the Americans came, Emilio Aguinaldo sent a letter to Sulu Sultan seeking help. Emilio Aguinaldo, through his cousin Baldero or Baldomero, something like that, went to Sulu, bringing the letter, calling Sulu Sultan as a brother, my brother, you help us, we have a common enemy. If we win, then rest assured, we recognize your religion, your faith, your history, and we are as an equal people. When the Americans knew it, the Americans went to Sulu immediately, because the Americans cannot afford to face two enemies, one in the north and one in the south. They went to Sulu and they negotiated with the Sultan, guaranteeing that they will not interfere in the matters of faith and customs of the people. Parang, hayaan mo lang kami nandito. Hindi kami makialam sa pananampalataya niyo, sa way of life niyo. So the American government managed to let the Sultan sign the Bates Treaty on the basis of no interference of religion and in way of life. When the insurrectos was defeated in Manila, Emilio Aguinaldo surrendered. The American government abrogated the Bates Agreement. Pinawalang bisa na nila yun dahil wala na yung purpose. Natalo na nila ang insurrectos. Now, it's time to deal with the Muslims. So they abrogated the Bates Agreement and they exercised direct control. They reduced the power of the Sultan. They reduced the power of Islamic court over the civil court. And that's when the Muslims continued to fight the Americans. They staged a resistance in Budbagsak, Buddahu, one of the fierce battle that was dramatized by President Duterte in speech in Laos, Cambodia, sa harap ni President Obama. So it neutralized. It's one of the betrayals of the American government against the Muslims.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
we have a very practical question from Rizal. She's asking, here's the context. So she has friends coming from abroad, to Manila, and I'm assuming that they are new to Manila and they are Muslims. So she is asking, what would you recommend to them the best halal food place in Metro Manila, and would you like to recommend a masjid for first-time visitors in Manila who are Muslims?
Mhm. Kailangan bayaran tayo ng mga restaurant nito kasi ipopromote natin sila. Kidding aside. There are many good Muslim restaurants in Quiapo. Restaurants of the Tausug, restaurants of the Maranao, restaurants of the Maguindanao. If you go to Quiapo, you can taste different varieties of Moro food. You go to Tausug restaurant, you will taste Yula Itum. This is a black soup. You go to Maranao restaurant, you can taste a different kind of food naman. And there are many Muslim native restaurants. I know one in Ermita, Dulang restaurant. Sa gilid siya ng PAL office. Along, I forgot the street, but if you're in the PAL office, it's near the Dulang restaurant. I'm sorry for other Muslim restaurants that I cannot mention because I don't know. But mostly, if you go to Quiapo, that's enough. You find the mosque, you see the way of life of the Muslims. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. If you go there and just be an ordinary citizen to look around, you won't be harmed. But if you go there to make trouble, of course, in whatever place you go, if you make trouble, you will be harmed. So if you go to Quiapo, I would encourage you go to Quiapo. So you see the Golden Mosque, you will taste some Muslim food. You can also bring your visitor to Taguig and see the Blue Mosque. May mga Muslim restaurants din doon na pwede mong kainan.
Thank you, sir.
Ano pa yung isang question? The mosque, yeah.
Yes, sir. This one is from Sabrina Alday. So here's what she said. I read in an article that one of the ways in which the Spanish enticed the early Filipinos to convert to Christianity was through the introduction of pork dishes such as lechon. Do you think that this theory holds water, considering that a pork dish is always the centerpiece of every Filipino feast?
I never came across with that kind of narrative. Probably it was true, but there were many ways of Spaniards advocating or promoting and even converting the natives into Catholicism. I think the most significant one is the narrative that Catholicism brings salvation to the early Filipino people. Not to mention the sword, because if you look back how Catholicism was propagated in many parts of the country, it was propagated along with the use of the sword. There was a forced conversion of the natives into Catholicism, although in some parts the conversion was peaceful. But along the process of evangelization, if you notice and if you recall in history, there were many indigenous thinkers, traditional thinkers like the Lakain, the Babaylan, who possess the rich and original indigenous ideas. They were persecuted, they were killed, and indigenous books that containing original thoughts of the Filipinos were burned down by the friars. They have burned hundreds, if not thousands, of manuscript of the Lalakain and the Babaylan. All of this you can find in many history books.
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, we are running over time. So, and we still have a lot of questions, but don't worry. You can still contact Professor Absari. So his email is flashed on the screen. So darwin.absari@yahoo.com. There's that. Is this right, no?
Yes, it's correct. Mm.
So if you have any questions,
I have also Facebook account, my name. You can just search my name.
yeah, so he's also available on Facebook. So if you have any more questions, feel free to directly contact our speaker. So he's free to talk to you, your viewers who are interested in learning more about our Islamic heritage.
Yes, yes, please. No problem.
For those who came in late, or for those who missed this episode, do not worry because in the next 24 hours, we're going to upload this episode in our YouTube channel. So this session was recorded and we're going to upload this later. So just key in Intramuros Administration via YouTube and look for this episode, or you may go to this link bit.ly/IAILS, and make sure as well to follow us in social media. So the Intramuros Administration is available in Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So this is our 19th episode now. So this is our 19th, and we still have a lot of webinars in the coming months. So we still have a lot. So stay tuned and get the freshest update from our social media. So make sure to subscribe to us, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we are also available in Google Arts and Culture. So despite our museums being closed due to this pandemic, you can still view our collection, our museum collection via Google Arts and Culture. Just key in Intramuros Administration. And I'd like to take this opportunity to promote our next webinar. So this is our 20th webinar. So this will be on July 31, 2020 at 6 p.m. So the topic is Trademarking Philippine Heritage. This is two parts. So part one is about intellectual property and textiles. So if you are interested in knowing about the about protecting our local textile heritage or local textile culture, because we can in fact protect them. So if you're interested, feel free to go to our webinar on July 31. So that's it. Before we end, Professor Absari, would you like to say some final words?
I'd like to say thank you for listening and for inviting me, and keep on widening your horizon. Philippine history is also rich. There is yet a lot more to be discovered, and it is only in understanding our history that we can learn to see each other as a kapwa, as a fellow human being, regardless of religion. It is only by looking back on who we really are, on our past history, we can learn to embrace each other. We can bring down these walls of prejudice and hatred that was set up by our colonial masters. It is only through learning history and widening our horizon, cleansing the biases and prejudice in our hearts and in our minds, that we can learn to embrace each other as one people. And this embracing each other as one people that brings us unity is what is needed by our country if we are to move forward as a strong nation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for the presentation, and thank you to everyone who viewed with us today. So uh, that's it for today. So until our next episode, so please stay tuned. But for now, good day, everyone, and thank you. So
Thank you.
bye for now.
Bye bye.